Bridge, and she will be presenting on aberrant emotional memory encoding in a transdiagnostic sample of patients with intrusive memories.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm a second year PhD student at the MRCVE, and today I'm going to be talking about my work on the emotional memory encoding in a transdiagnostic sample of individuals with intrusive memories. So after suffering from psychological trauma, many individuals can go on to repeatedly experience sensory perceptual intrusions of the event. And these intrusive memories typically take the form of visual images, but can also be sounds, smells, tastes, and bodily sensations, and come with negative emotions associated with the hotspots of the trauma event. So I'll just use this example to explain my point in the theory underlying the formation of intrusive memories. So some background information: I really hate birds and I have a bit of a fear of them. So I'll set the scene. I'm walking along the beach in Brighton, having a nice day, enjoying the sun, and I have a cheese sandwich, which I quickly realised was a very bad idea being in Brighton, as I'm then circulated by a lot of seagulls, and they come take the cheese sandwich and have their beaks around my hand in the process. And this was a very stressful event, but if you imagine, I might have some intrusive memories of it after, and these would all be centered around the salient details of what happened. So, for example, the image of the birds, maybe the sound of them, the sound of the sea, or the taste of the cheese. These are all what we call the sensory perceptual details. And according to prominent theoretical models, these intrusive memories occur as a result of a disruption to the way that the event is encoded in our memory. So the dual representation theory by Bruin and colleagues suggests that, or they emphasize there's two systems supporting healthy memory. The first is involved in perceptual information processing, and the second is involved in this contextualized representations. So that's the space and time. So in healthy memory, these sensory perceptual details that I just talked about would be integrated in space and time, and also with my existing autobiographical information. But during high levels of trauma and stress, the sensory perceptual details are strengthened through amygdala upregulation, and the contextualized representations are weakened. And this can result in the involuntary retrieval of sensory perceptual information by environmental triggers without the context. So for example, I might see a bird and it might bring back that trauma and the negative emotions associated with it. So a number of studies have looked at the effects of negative emotion on memory encoding in healthy populations, and this work shown here was done by James Bisbee and colleagues at UCL, who I'm currently collaborating with on all my studies. And he showed visual stills of neutral and negative images, for example, of mutilated bodies, to elicit high levels of arousal, what might happen in trauma, and then measure the effects on memory encoding. So they showed pairs of images, and these might have been two negative images, a negative and a neutral image, or two neutral images. And after they see all of the image pairs, they then have a short break, and they come back for a memory test. So then they're shown all images again, plus a lot of new images, and they're asked, is this old, i.e. have they seen it in the encoding phase, or is it new? And this is a measure of their recognition memory. And then afterwards, if they've said it's old, they'll then be asked to recall the image pair. And this will be a measure of their associative memory. So as you can see here, their results was a good example of the dual representation theory, where the individuals had better memory for the negative cues versus the neutral cues. So that's kind of enhanced memory of the details. But then their ability to make associations and the image pairs was impaired when there was any negative content. So that would be a sort of representation that would have been difficult to associate the details with the context. And it was hypothesized that this is a basic representation of what occurs in the formation of intrusive memories. However, we know that for some individuals, but not all, they then go on to experience persistent intrusive memories. So there must be some level of individual susceptibility. And we were interested in looking at whether some individuals might express a vulnerability to aberrant emotional memory encoding. So to test this, we replicated the methods in a clinical sample of individuals, and we used the same task, but we took out the very traumatic images because individuals were at home, and we didn't want them to have very adverse effects while at home. So we recruited 39 individuals with intrusive memories, and we had 45 healthy controls. And the intrusive memories was defined as a score of 12 or above on the impact of event scale. So we hypothesized that we would replicate the results by James Bisbee, but we also thought that individuals with intrusive memories would have a further enhanced memory for the negative cues, and we thought that they would have a further impairment in their ability to make associations when there was any negative content. So we did a repeated measures ANOVA to test this and used cue, target, and memory type as within subjects' factors. And we found a significant three-way interaction. So we found that individuals actually had decreased ability to recall the negative cues versus the neutral cues. So that actually is the opposite effect of what James Bisbee found. So we thought that this effect might be driven by this intrusions group that we were testing. And I'll go on to explain that a bit more in the next slide. And then for the associative memory task, we found that individuals had worse memory for the mixed valence pairs relative to the pure valence pairs. So that was the pairs where it was a neutral and a negative image. And we thought that might be a result of it being easier to unitize two images of the same valence. So for example, if you're presented with a car crash and an image of a body, it might be easier to make that link and then recall them later than a neutral image of a lamp and then a negative image of a car crash. Could be slightly harder to recall. So we went on to explore the effects of symptom severity on item memory. And we found, we looked at IES total scores as well as the subscale scores as the predictor variables. And we did find that individuals that had greater severity on all the scales had poorer memory for the negative cues. And to have an interim summary here, so we show that individuals experiencing intrusive memories have poorer recognition memory for negative cue stimuli relative to the healthy controls. And this might suggest that some individuals are susceptible to the aberrant memory encoding, and this might engender or transact with the development of these intrusive memories. So some recent work has showed that individuals with anxiety disorders have demonstrated high levels of emotional arousal and attention maintenance on these threat or negative stimuli. And studies have also shown that this biased attentional processing of threat cues predicts higher subsequent intrusive memory frequency. So we thought that this disruption to memory encoding that we've just seen in our last study might be driven by attentional biases or maybe heightened arousal to the negative stimuli. So to go on, we wanted to explore this a little bit further, and we thought it might be a good idea to look at some eye tracking data during the encoding phase when they're looking at these images. And the data had actually already been collected by James Bisbee and his colleagues at UCL. So we did an exploratory analysis, and he had recorded eye tracking during the encoding phase with the same task as I talked about before. And we had a set of 18 healthy controls. So the aim was to explore the effects of attention maintenance on memory encoding using the fixation time data, and we hypothesized that the attentional biases would lead to incoherent memory encoding. And again, we did a repeated measures ANOVA, but we in fact found that there was no significant differences in their memory recall for the different cue types. However, there was a slight trend towards better memory for the negative cues relative to the neutral cues, which is what James has found in his previous work, and this was a very small sample in this study. We then wanted to look at whether fixation time on the negative or neutral cues was later predictive of their memory recall. And here you can see with the green line that when participants are presented with a negative and a neutral image, the longer they fixate on the negative image, the poorer their memory recall. So to summarize, individuals with intrusive memories demonstrate poorer recognition memory for the negative cue stimuli relative to the healthy controls. And this finding suggests that there may be different mechanisms underlying the processing during or after trauma that make an individual susceptible to developing or maintaining intrusions. Our exploratory analysis investigated whether attentional biases might drive this effect. And when presented with a negative neutral image pair, we did find that greater fixation time on the negative stimuli was related to poorer memory recall. This avoidance of the negative stimuli is unlikely to be the only protective mechanism against memory disruptions, as when the healthy individuals were presented with 2 negative stimuli, so there was no possibility of avoiding it by looking at a neutral image, there was still no memory disruption. So there must be some other factors that are protecting them against aberrant memory encoding. And we thought this could be the heightened arousal response that some individuals have. So to explore this a bit further, in our next study, we're going to be measuring immune responses to stress to test how particular immunophenotypes map onto memory performance and may confer a vulnerability to mental health disorders. And finally, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to my collaborator, James Bisbee, and my amazing supervisors, Camilla Nord and Caitlin Hitchcock. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. Have we got any questions? I have one short question, if that's okay. So you talked about how, it was really interesting how you talked about the fact that people with intrusive memories have got worse recall for negative pictures and things.
Yeah.
I presume, but they also have more eye fixation. So do you think that's because they're getting an intrusive memory due to your stimuli, or do you think that's some other process?
So we didn't have the intrusive memories group in the eye tracking study, but from the other studies we do think that they would have been looking at the images for longer. And I think that this focus on the emotional stimuli is what causes the encoding disruptions. So that means that in real life, maybe if they focus on it, they have heightened levels of arousal, and that would then mean that it's not integrated with the rest of their memory and their autobiographical memory, which then could be a mechanism leading to their intrusions later on. So, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so in the interest of time, I might move on, but thank you very much.